Is this a joke? He hissed. My parents are elites. Don't serve them this garbage. My in-laws froze. But a second later, his jaw dropped when I whispered I didn't buy this. My name is Clara. I am 28 years old, and I work as a user experience designer. If you do not know what that is, it basically means I spend my days analyzing how people interact with systems. I look for bugs, I smooth out glitches, and I try to make complicated, messy things feel intuitive and flawless. My entire career is built on paying attention to the tiny details that most people ignore. I guess that is the ultimate irony of my life. I was so good at identifying red flags in software interfaces, but I completely missed the massive, glaring system failures in my own marriage. I met Julian when I was 25. He was 32, an investment banker who moved through the world like he owned the floorboards he walked on. The first time we talked, it was at a charity gala I only attended because my company bought a table. Julian was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, holding a glass of scotch, and laughing with a group of older men. But when he looked at me, he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He was charming, attentive, and incredibly persistent. He did not play games. He asked me out, took me to a quiet, dimly lit Italian place, and asked me questions about my life like he was genuinely fascinated by every word I said. He was the prototype of a perfect husband. Then there was his family. Julian came from what you would call old money. Elite. The kind of wealth that does not need to shout because everyone already knows it is there. His parents, Marcus and Beatrice, lived in a sprawling estate with perfectly manicured lawns and a driveway longer than my entire street. The first time Julian took me to meet them, my stomach was in knots. I grew up middle class. My dad sold insurance, and my mom was a middle school teacher. I was terrified these wealthy, sophisticated people would look down their noses at me. But I was so wrong. Beatrice opened the massive oak door herself, bypassing the housekeeper, and pulled me into a warm hug. She smelled like expensive gardenias and kindness. Marcus, this intimidating financial titan, spent an hour showing me his collection of vintage vinyl records and asking my opinion on jazz. They did not care about my pedigree or my bank account. They cared that Julian looked happy. They welcomed me into their lives without a single ounce of pretension. Beatrice even told me, on our wedding day, that she had always prayed for a daughter, and now she finally had one. I felt like I had won the lottery. I had a handsome, successful husband who adored me, and in-laws who treated me like their own flesh and blood. It was a flawless system. At least, that is what the interface showed me. The first 2 years of our marriage were a blur of dinner dates, weekend getaways, and building our life together. Julian was ambitious, working long hours at the bank, but he always made sure to leave his weekends open for us. Everything felt secure. Then, early one Tuesday morning, I stared at a plastic stick on our bathroom counter and saw 2 pink lines. I was pregnant. When I showed Julian the test that evening, his reaction was exactly what you would want to see in a movie. He dropped his briefcase, scooped me up, and spun me around the kitchen. There were actual tears in his eyes. He pressed his hands against my flat stomach and whispered that he was going to give our baby the world. We picked out the name Hazel that very night. I went to sleep feeling like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. But looking back, that positive test was the moment the malware was introduced into our system. It started subtly. About 3 weeks after we found out about Hazel, Julian's schedule began to shift. He started coming home at 8 at night, then 9, then 10. When I asked him about it, his face took on this weary, noble expression. He told me that having a baby on the way changed everything. He said he needed to grind harder, secure bigger accounts, and build a financial empire so Hazel would never want for anything. It sounded so responsible. It sounded like a man taking care of his family. So, I nodded and swallowed my loneliness. I told myself it was temporary. But then the weekends started disappearing too. Suddenly, there were mandatory client golf tournaments on Saturdays and networking brunches on Sundays. He was always perfectly groomed, smelling of expensive cologne, rushing out the door while I sat on the couch in my sweatpants, sipping ginger ale to keep my stomach settled. The warmth in his voice started to vanish. If I called him during the day just to say hello, he would sigh heavily into the receiver, making me feel like an annoying distraction. He started using the slick, psychological jargon whenever I tried to express how isolated I felt. If I said I missed him, he would look at me with pity and say, "Clara, you are letting your pregnancy hormones cloud your logic. I am out there fighting a war for our future, and you are making me feel guilty for providing. You need to work on your emotional independence." It was a masterful manipulation. He took my legitimate feelings of neglect and spun them around until I was the one apologizing for being needy. The glitch was getting worse, and I was too tired to fix it. By my 4th month, the morning sickness escalated into a nightmare called hyperemesis gravidarum. It is a fancy medical term that means you throw up so much you cannot even keep water down. I was losing weight instead of gaining it. My doctor put me on a cocktail of anti-nausea medications that made me feel like a zombie. I was working from home, barely dragging myself from the bed to my laptop to the bathroom. This was when Julian's mask really started to slip. Instead of seeing a sick wife who needed help, he saw an inconvenience. He hated the smell of the house. He hated that there was not a hot dinner waiting for him. One Friday evening, after a particularly brutal week, Julian promised he would stay home on Saturday to help me paint the nursery. I had picked out this beautiful, soft sage green. I was so excited. It felt like a chance for us to finally bond over the baby. Saturday morning came. I woke up to the sound of the shower running. When Julian walked out of the bathroom, he was not wearing old clothes for painting. He was wearing his tailored golf polo and a pair of crisp khakis. I sat up, my head spinning, and asked him where he was going. He did not even look at me as he strapped on his watch. He said a senior partner invited him to a private country club, and it was a career-defining opportunity he could not pass up. When I reminded him about the nursery, he scoffed. He said we had months left and that I was fixating on trivial things while he was securing our financial legacy. He walked out. I sat in the silent house, crying until my ribs ached. But I was stubborn. I thought, fine, I will do it myself. I dragged the cans of paint into the empty room. I got down on my hands and knees to apply the blue painter's tape along the baseboards. The effort of bending over, combined with the chemical smell of the tape and the paint, hit me like a truck. The room started spinning. I barely made it to the hallway before I collapsed onto the carpet, my vision going black at the edges. I woke up a few hours later, stiff and freezing. Julian did not come home until past 9 o'clock that night. When he walked in, the smell of premium gin and cigar smoke rolled off him in waves. I was sitting on the couch, pale and shaking. Instead of rushing to my side to ask if I was okay, he looked at the open paint cans in the nursery inside. He looked at me, shook his head, and delivered a line I will never forget. He said, "Clara, why do you always have to play the martyr? I told you we would hire someone to do it. You are micromanaging this pregnancy, and honestly, your anxiety is exhausting to be around." He went upstairs and shut the bedroom door. I slept on the couch. The poison was not just in the paint fumes. It was breathing right there in my house. Month 6 hit me like a ton of bricks. My blood pressure spiked, and my doctor placed me on partial bed rest. I had to take an early leave of absence from my design job. Suddenly, my entire universe shrank to the 4 walls of our house. The silence in that place was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that made my ears ring. Julian's career was apparently skyrocketing, which meant he was a ghost. He left before I woke up and came home after I had gone to sleep. The isolation was weaponized. Every time I tried to talk to him about the sheer terror I felt about giving birth, or how lonely I was, he would shut me down with clinical precision. He would say things like, "Millions of women do this every day, Clara. You are acting like you are the first person to ever have a child. Why do you need constant validation?" Then, the red flags stopped being subtle. One afternoon, I was moving a load of his laundry from the washer to the dryer. I always checked his pockets because he had a habit of leaving dry cleaning receipts in them. I pulled out a crumpled piece of thick, textured paper. It was a receipt from an ultra-luxury women's boutique downtown. The total was over $2,000 for a silk robe and a set of imported perfumes. When Julian came home that night, I held the receipt up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I asked him who it was for. He did not blink. He did not stammer. His heart rate probably did not even go up. He smoothly took his jacket off and said, "Oh, that. The senior vice president of our division, a woman who has been at the firm for 30 years, is retiring. The partners pooled our money to get her a luxury gift basket. I was tasked with picking it up." He looked at me with an expression of deep disappointment. He said, "Are you really going through my pockets looking for reasons to accuse me of something? Is this what you do all day while I am out funding your lifestyle?" I felt a cold rush of shame. He was so convincing. He made me feel crazy, paranoid, and ungrateful. I apologized. I actually apologized to him for finding a receipt. He nodded, accepted my apology, and told me to order takeout for dinner because the house smelled stale. I was a prisoner in a glass cage, and he was holding the only key. The breaking point did not happen with a massive screaming match. It happened quietly on a Thursday evening during my 7th month of pregnancy. I had developed severe sciatica. The pain shooting down my lower back and legs was so intense that some days I had to use the walls to support my weight just to walk to the bathroom. I was trying to make myself a bowl of cereal for dinner because I was too exhausted to cook. My grip slipped, and the glass bowl shattered on the kitchen floor, splashing milk and cereal everywhere. I burst into tears. Not a graceful, quiet cry, but ugly, heaving sobs of pure exhaustion. I lowered myself onto the cold tile floor, clutching my massive belly, trying to pick up the shards of glass with trembling fingers. That was the exact moment Julian walked through the door. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen. He did not drop his briefcase to help me. He did not ask if I was hurt or if I had cut myself. He just stood there in his $3,000 suit, looking down at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered into his pristine house. He let out a long, slow breath. Then he spoke. His voice was not angry. It was worse. It was completely dead, devoid of any warmth or humanity. He said, "You know, Clara, since you stopped bringing in a paycheck, the absolute least you could do is keep the environment clean. I work 14 hours a day managing millions of dollars, and I come home to my wife sitting in a puddle of milk crying like a toddler. It is pathetic. It really is." He stepped over the mess, careful not to get milk on his leather shoes, walked to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of sparkling water, and went upstairs to his home office. I stopped crying. The tears literally dried up in my eyes. The UX designer in me suddenly saw the entire system map of our marriage with crystal clarity. There was no bug to fix. The program was designed this way. He did not view me as a partner. He viewed me as an asset that had temporarily depreciated in value because I was pregnant. I was no longer serving my function, so he was discarding me emotionally. I did not scream. I did not follow him upstairs to argue. I slowly stood up, my back screaming in agony. I swept up the glass, wiped the floor, and threw the towel in the trash. Then, I walked into our bedroom, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and packed enough clothes for a month. I grabbed my laptop, my prenatal vitamins, and my car keys. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove to my parents' house in the dead of night. I did not leave a note. My parents' house was small, a little outdated, and smelled like cinnamon and old books. It was the safest place on earth. When I showed up at midnight, my dad carried my bags, and my mom made me hot tea. They did not ask a million questions. They just set up the guest room and let me sleep for 14 hours straight. For 3 weeks, I lived in complete silence from Julian. He did not call. He did not text. I sent him one single email letting him know I was at my parents' house and that the baby was fine. He never replied. I spent my days sitting on the porch, feeling hazel kick and trying to process the fact that my marriage was over. Then, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, a sleek black town car pulled into my parents' modest driveway. I was sitting in the living room folding baby clothes when my mom called out, "Clara, someone is here." I froze. I expected Julian. But when the door opened, Marcus and Beatrice stepped inside. They looked completely out of place in our tiny living room, but their faces were stricken with genuine panic. Beatrice rushed over to me, grabbing my hands. She looked at my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes. Marcus stood awkwardly holding a massive fruit basket, looking deeply uncomfortable. Beatrice's voice was trembling. She said, "Clara, sweetheart, we are so sorry. We had no idea. We thought you were just on bed rest. Julian told us you were resting upstairs every time we wanted to visit. We only found out you were gone because Marcus stopped by your house to drop off some paperwork, and Julian finally broke down and confessed you left him." They did not know. Julian had been playing the perfect, devoted husband to his elite parents while his pregnant wife was hiding out in the suburbs. Marcus looked at me, his authoritative voice softening. He said, "Whatever he did to make you leave, he is paying for it. You do not have to go through this alone." Just as they sat down, the front door opened again. Julian walked in. He looked awful. His hair was messy, his tie was loose, and he had dark shadows under his eyes. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. He dropped to his knees right in front of the sofa where I was sitting. He grabbed my hand and started crying. Real, wet tears. He said, "Clara, I am so sorry." I cracked under the pressure. I was terrified of failing as a father, and I took it out on you. I have been going to therapy for the last 2 weeks. I swear to you, I will change. Please come home. Hazel needs her father. My parents watched in silence. Marcus and Beatrice looked at him with a mix of pity and relief. The pressure in the room was immense. Everyone wanted a happy ending. My analytical brain screamed that it was a trap. But I was 8 months pregnant, exhausted, and terrified of raising a child completely alone. I looked at Julian, and I laid out a system. I told him I would return for the final month of the pregnancy, but there were strict rules. No more late nights without proof. Mandatory therapy together. If he slipped up once, I was gone forever. Julian nodded frantically, kissing my hands. The truce was signed. I packed my bags and went back to the glass cage. If you are enjoying this story so far, please take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below telling me what city you are watching from. Every comment helps push this video to more people who love drama just as much as we do. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the story. The false truce we established at my parents' house held together like wet paper. For the last 4 weeks of my pregnancy, Julian played the part of the attentive husband whenever we were in public or whenever his parents called. Behind closed doors, it was a different story. The silence returned. The late nights at the office returned. I was simply too exhausted and too heavy to fight anymore. I spent my days setting up the nursery and praying that the arrival of the baby would magically reboot his paternal instincts. Hazel decided to make her entrance into the world on a rainy Tuesday morning in early October. The contractions woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, sharp and unforgiving. I reached across the bed, but Julian's side was empty. He had fallen asleep in his home office again. I waddled down the hallway and woke him up. He rubbed his eyes, looked at his phone, and sighed. He actually sighed. He told me to call my dad to take me to the hospital because he had a mandatory conference call with a client in Tokyo at 4 o'clock, and he would meet me in the delivery room as soon as he could. My dad drove through the pouring rain, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. My mom sat in the back with me, wiping my forehead with a damp cloth. I was in labor for 14 agonizing hours. It was a chaotic, painful blur of monitors beeping, nurses rushing in and out, and the crushing realization that my husband was choosing a boardroom over the birth of his first child. Every time the door opened, I looked up, hoping it was him. Every time, it was just another nurse checking my vitals. Julian finally rushed into the delivery room at 5 o'clock in the evening, a mere 10 minutes before Hazel was actually born. He was still wearing his suit, though he had discarded the tie. He rushed to my side, grabbing my hand and whispering apologies. But as he leaned in close to my face, my senses, heightened by the pain and the adrenaline, caught something. He did not smell like the sterile hospital air. He smelled strongly of wintergreen mints and stale cigarette smoke. Julian did not smoke. He despised cigarettes. It was a smell that clung to clothes only when you had been intimately close to someone who did. Before I could even process that red flag, the doctor told me to give one final push. The room erupted in a chorus of encouragement, and a second later, the sharp, beautiful sound of Hazel's first cry filled the air. They placed her on my chest, a tiny, warm, perfect little human. I burst into tears of pure relief and overwhelming love. I looked up at Julian. He was crying too. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, playing the part of the overwhelmed, joyful father perfectly for the nurses who were cooing at him. But as I watched him, the disgust I felt was visceral. The tears felt performative. The smell of the smoke and the mints lingered in the space between us. In the exact moment I became a mother, I also realized, with absolute certainty, that I was entirely alone. The algorithm of our marriage was completely broken, and there was no fixing it. We brought Hazel home wrapped in a soft pink blanket and a cloud of deep anxiety. The reality of postpartum life hit me like a freight train. It is a brutal, raw, and completely unglamorous phase of life that nobody truly prepares you for. You are bleeding, you are sweating through your clothes in the middle of the night, your hormones are crashing, and you are trying to keep a tiny, fragile human alive on a maximum of 2 hours of sleep. To make matters infinitely more difficult, Hazel developed severe colic. From 6 o'clock in the evening until 2 o'clock in the morning, she would scream. It was not a normal baby cry, it was a high-pitched, ear-piercing shriek that made my chest tighten with panic. I bounced on yoga balls, I paced the hallways, I sang every lullaby I could think of. Nothing worked. Julian's grand promise to change and be a supportive father evaporated by day 3. When Hazel's colic flared up, he did not offer to take a shift. Instead, he packed up his expensive silk pillows, grabbed his heavy duvet, and moved into the guest bedroom at the far end of the hallway. He told me, with a completely straight face, that sleep deprivation was a safety hazard for someone managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio. He claimed he needed his brain sharp for Wall Street, and that staying up with a crying infant was biologically my job anyway. The most soul-crushing moments happened during the overnight pumping sessions. Because Hazel had trouble latching, I had to use an electric breast pump every 3 hours to keep my milk supply up. It was a painful, isolating process. One night, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting in the dark living room, hooked up to the machine. My nipples were cracked and bleeding. Tears were streaming silently down my face from the sheer exhaustion. The mechanical, rhythmic humming of the pump was the only sound in the house. Suddenly, the door to the guest bedroom swung open. Julian stomped down the hallway, wearing his silk pajamas, his hair perfectly tousled. He stood in the doorway of the living room, illuminated only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not offer to get me a glass of water. He crossed his arms and let out an exaggerated sigh. "Clara, do you really have to do that right now? The vibration of that machine is echoing through the floorboards. It is ruining my REM sleep cycle. I have a massive pitch tomorrow morning." I stared at him, feeling like I was hallucinating. "I am feeding your daughter, Julian," I whispered, my voice cracking. He rolled his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes. He said, "Well, maybe if you were not failing at basic biology, you would not need a loud machine to do it. Figure it out, Clara. Put a towel under it or something." He turned around and went back to bed. I sat there in the dark, the machine humming, and felt the last remaining ounce of love I had for him turn to ash. By the time Hazel was 2 months old, I was a walking ghost. I had not showered in 3 days. I was living on dry toast and cold coffee. My world was a relentless cycle of diapers, crying, pumping, and rocking. Julian, meanwhile, was thriving. He had just landed a massive new account at his firm, and his ego was inflated to astronomical proportions. He was coming home later than ever, always buzzing with manic energy, smelling like expensive steakhouses and high-end liquor. One Tuesday evening, he walked through the front door at 8 o'clock. I was sitting on the living room rug, trying to fold a mountain of baby clothes while Hazel briefly dozed in her swing. I was wearing stained gray sweatpants and one of his old t-shirts. Julian stopped in the entryway, looked me up and down with an expression of sheer disgust, and tossed his leather briefcase onto the sofa. He cleared his throat and assumed his authoritative boardroom voice. He announced, "My parents are coming over this Saturday for lunch. I told them about my promotion and they want to celebrate." Panic immediately gripped my chest. Saturday was 4 days away. The house was a disaster. There were burp cloths on every surface, unwashed dishes in the sink, and dust gathering in the corners. I looked up at him and said, "Julian, I cannot host a lunch right now. Hazel is barely sleeping. I am barely sleeping. I will order some nice Italian food from that place downtown, and we can just eat on paper plates." Julian's face darkened. He stepped closer to me, towering over me while I sat on the floor. "Absolutely not," he snapped. "Are you insane? My parents are elites, Clara. They do not eat greasy takeout from cardboard boxes. They're coming to celebrate my success, and I expect you to play the part of a capable, grateful wife. You are going to cook." I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "I do not have the energy to cook a feast, Julian. I cannot even stand at the stove for 10 minutes without my back spasming." He ignored me entirely. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his suit pocket and dropped it onto the coffee table. I wrote down a menu. A roasted tenderloin, some truffle asparagus, au gratin potatoes, and a decent appetizer spread. "You have 4 days to figure it out. Go to the premium grocer across town. Do not buy the cheap stuff. I want this house spotless, and I want you out of those repulsive sweatpants. If you want to continue living this comfortable lifestyle that I provide, you need to start pulling your weight." He walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of scotch, and disappeared upstairs. I reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the piece of paper. It was an impossible demand. It was a deliberate, calculated test designed to make me fail, just so he could have another reason to tell me how useless I was. I sat on the floor, clutching the grocery list, and finally accepted that I was married to a monster. The rest of the week was a masterclass in survival. Every time I tried to organize the house, Hazel would sense my stress and start screaming. By Friday night, I was running on pure adrenaline and a dangerous amount of caffeine. Julian had been completely useless, leaving for work early and coming home late, offering nothing but critical comments about the dust on the baseboards. Saturday morning arrived like an executioner. The lunch was scheduled for 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I woke up at 6 o'clock, strapped Hazel into her baby carrier on my chest, and started trying to conquer the impossible menu Julian had mandated. It was a disaster from the first minute. I dropped a carton of heavy cream on the floor, splattering it across the cabinets. While I was trying to clean that up, the expensive beef tenderloin I was trying to sear in the cast iron skillet started burning. Thick, acrid smoke filled the kitchen, setting off the shrill blare of the fire alarm. Hazel woke up instantly, letting out a terrified, ear-piercing shriek. I grabbed a dish towel, frantically waving it at the smoke detector while trying to bounce a screaming infant on my chest. I looked at the blackened, ruined meat on the stove, the spilled cream, the mountain of unwashed prep bowls, and the clock on the microwave. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. I broke. I completely and totally broke. I slid down the front of the cabinets until I was sitting on the sticky floor, pulling Hazel tight against my chest, and I started sobbing. It was a deep, guttural wail of total defeat. I could not do it. I could not play the game anymore. Through my tears, survival instinct finally kicked in. I reached for my phone on the counter. I opened my browser and searched for the most expensive, high-end gourmet caterer in our zip code. I found an artisan deli that catered corporate events. I called them, my voice shaking, and ordered an extravagant, pre-made spread. Marinated Kalamata olives, imported aged cheeses, rosemary focaccia bread, prosciutto, truffle hummus, and a massive artisan salad. It cost me nearly $400 on my credit card, but I did not care. I threw the burnt meat into the trash, wiped down the counters, and surrendered. At 11 o'clock, a full 2 hours before they were supposed to arrive, the doorbell rang. I froze. I looked through the peephole and saw Marcus and Beatrice standing on the porch. My heart plummeted into my stomach. I opened the door, my eyes red and puffy, my hair a mess, still wearing a stained t-shirt. Beatrice took one look at my face and the false, cheerful smile on her face vanished. She stepped inside, dropping her designer handbag on the floor, and immediately reached for Hazel. "Clara, my God, what is wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with worry. I broke down again. I babbled, apologizing profusely. I told them I ruined the tenderloin, that Julian was going to be furious, that the house was not perfect, and that I had to order takeout. I pointed a trembling finger toward the plastic deli containers sitting on the kitchen island, waiting to be plated. Marcus walked into the kitchen. He looked at the spread on the island. Then a slow, incredibly sad smile spread across his face. He lifted a massive canvas tote bag he had brought in with him and set it on the counter. He pulled out identical plastic containers. Truffle hummus. Imported cheese. Rosemary focaccia. "We brought the exact same thing," Marcus said softly. "We stopped at the deli on the way here. We figured you were too exhausted to cook, and we just wanted to see our granddaughter. We did not want you to stress." Beatrice walked over, holding Hazel in one arm, and wrapped her free arm around my shaking shoulders. "Julian told us you insisted on cooking a massive feast to show off," she said, her eyes narrowing. "He said you were being stubborn about doing it all yourself." The realization hit all three of us at the same time. The lies. The manipulation. Beatrice kissed the top of my head. "Go upstairs, Clara. Take a hot shower and get into bed. Sleep for an hour. Marcus and I have the baby, and we will handle our son when he gets here." For the first time in almost a year, I felt safe. I handed over a bottle of breast milk, walked upstairs, fell into my bed, and passed out the second my head hit the pillow. I slept for exactly 2 hours. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that only comes when your body is running on absolute empty. I was jolted awake by the heavy, aggressive sound of the front door slamming shut downstairs. I sat up, my heart instantly racing. I could hear Julian's heavy footsteps stomping into the entryway. I quickly threw on a clean sweater, splashed cold water on my face, and hurried down the stairs. The house was strangely quiet. I did not hear Marcus, Beatrice, or the baby. I rounded the corner into the kitchen just as Julian walked in from the hallway. He was wearing a sharp, custom-fitted blazer, looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine. He stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto the kitchen island. Marcus and Beatrice had unpacked all the food, both my order and theirs, but they had left everything in the clear plastic deli containers. It was a massive, undeniable mountain of store-bought food sitting right in the middle of our pristine marble counter. Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. He slammed his leather briefcase onto a bar stool. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and tossed it aggressively face up onto the kitchen island, right next to a container of prosciutto. He whirled around to face me, his eyes wide with fury. "Is this a joke?" he hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. I stood at the edge of the kitchen, crossing my arms, feeling strangely calm. "No, Julian. It is lunch." He threw his hands up in the air, gesturing wildly at the plastic tubs. "I gave you 4 days, Clara. 4 days to put together a decent meal. My parents are elites. They do not eat this kind of garbage. You think you can just serve them peasant scraps out of plastic boxes because you are too lazy to turn on an oven? You are deliberately trying to humiliate me." He took a step toward me, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I am going to sweep all of this trash into the garbage can right now, and you are going to go into that pantry and find something, anything, to cook before they get here. Do you understand me?" Before I could even open my mouth to respond, a voice cut through the air like a cracking whip. "Do not touch that food, Julian." Julian froze. He spun around slowly. Marcus and Beatrice stepped out of the shadows of the formal dining room. Beatrice was gently rocking a sleeping Hazel in her arms, her face a mask of absolute, icy disgust. Marcus stood beside her, his hands tucked casually into his pockets, but his eyes were lethal. Julian's joy actually dropped. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. "Mom." "Dad." I thought you were coming at 1 o'clock. We arrived at 11, Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm. We found your wife having a panic attack on the floor because she was terrified of your reaction to burning a piece of meat. Julian swallowed hard, taking a step back. Dad, you do not understand. She is just hormonal. She refuses to put in any effort. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step forward into the kitchen. He pointed a finger directly at the plastic containers on the island. I bought that garbage, Julian. Your mother, and I brought it here so your wife would not have to slave over a hot stove while recovering from childbirth. Julian's face went completely pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked like a ghost. He looked at the food, then at me, and then back at his father. Oh, he stammered. I did not know. I just thought Clara was being disrespectful to you guys. I was just trying to defend your honor. You were verbally abusing the mother of your child, Beatrice snapped, her voice shaking with anger. You lied to us. You told us she was thriving. You told us she was insisting on hosting. You were a cruel, arrogant little boy playing dress-up in a suit. The silence that followed was suffocating. Julian was trapped, completely exposed, standing in the ruins of the perfect image he had spent years building for his parents. And just when I thought the moment could not possibly get any more intense, the universe decided to deliver the final, fatal blow. The kitchen was dead silent, save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of Hazel sleeping in Beatrice's arms. Julian was shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, clearly trying to formulate a corporate spin to talk his way out of this disaster. Then a sharp, cheerful ping echoed off the marble countertops. Julian's smartphone, which he had thrown face up onto the kitchen island in his fit of rage, lit up. Because it was an older model, the screen brightly displayed the full text of the incoming message notification. Beatrice was standing right next to the island. Instinctively, she looked down at the glowing screen. I watched her eyes track the words. I watched the exact second her expression shifted from anger to absolute, devastating horror. Julian realized his mistake a fraction of a second too late. He lunged toward the island, his hand outstretched. Wait, do not look at that. Marcus moved faster. Despite his age, he stepped smoothly into Julian's path, pressing a firm hand against his son's chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. Do not move, Marcus growled. Beatrice reached out with her free hand and picked up the phone. Her hand was perfectly steady. She looked at Julian, her eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. Would you like to read this to your wife, Julian? Or should I? Julian was sweating now. It is just spam, Mom. It is a group chat from the office. Give it back. Beatrice turned her gaze to me. Her voice was crystal clear as she read the message aloud. Sienna, you left your tie here last night. Cannot wait for round 2. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not heartbreak. It was not hysterical grief. It was clarity. A cold, absolute, calculating clarity. All the red flags, the mysterious receipts, the late nights, the smell of mint and smoke in the delivery room, the refusal to help with the baby. It all snapped into a perfect, horrific grid. Sienna, I said, my voice eerily calm. That is the junior analyst you hired 3 months ago, isn't it? The one who needed so much mentoring after hours. Julian looked like a cornered animal. Clara, please. It means nothing. I was stressed. You were always tired. You were always complaining. I just needed an outlet. It was a mistake. You were blaming your pregnant, bleeding, exhausted wife for your decision to sleep with a 24-year-old? Marcus asked. The disgust in his voice was so profound it made Julian flinch. Dad, I am still providing for her. Julian shouted, desperation making his voice crack. I pay the mortgage. I bought her that car. I am building an empire for this family. You are a parasite, Marcus said softly. You use my name and my connections to build your little empire, and you use this incredible woman as a maid and an incubator. I look at you, and I do not see my son. I see a pathetic coward. Julian started crying again, the same fake, manipulative tears he used at the hospital. Mom, please. Tell him. Tell him I am sorry. Beatrice did not even blink. She gently kissed Hazel's forehead, turned her back on Julian, and walked over to stand beside me. Marcus turned to me. His expression softened with deep respect. Clara, this is your house. What do you want to do? I looked at Julian. I looked at the $3,000 suit, the perfectly styled hair, the expensive watch. He looked so incredibly small. I want him out, I said, my voice steady. Right now. I want his keys on the counter, and I want him out of my sight. Julian's eyes widened. You cannot kick me out of my own house. My name is on the deed. Marcus reached into Julian's pocket, pulled out the sleek metal keychain, and dropped it onto the marble island with a loud clatter. Then, he grabbed Julian by the collar of his expensive blazer. You are leaving, Marcus stated, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. You are going to pack one bag, and I am going to escort you to the curb. Do not make me call the police to remove a trespasser. 10 minutes later, Julian was standing on the front porch with a single leather duffel bag. He looked through the glass door at me, expecting me to break, expecting me to run out and forgive him. I reached out, locked the deadbolt, and closed the blinds. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of quiet efficiency. My parents came over to help me clean the house and change the locks. Beatrice stayed with me, helping with Hazel, making sure I ate hot meals, and treating me with a level of care I had never experienced before. Nobody mentioned Julian's name. On Wednesday afternoon, Marcus returned. He walked into the living room carrying a thick manila folder and a leather briefcase. He sat down across from me at the dining table, opened the folder, and slid a stack of legal documents toward me. These are the divorce papers, Clara, Marcus said. His tone was strictly business, the tone of a titan of industry who had just executed a hostile takeover. I had my team of corporate lawyers draft them. You are getting full physical and legal custody of Hazel. He gets supervised visitation only if he passes a psychiatric evaluation. You keep the house, the car, and 90% of the joint assets. The child support is set at the maximum legal limit. I stared at the thick stack of paper. Marcus, he will never sign this. He is too proud. He will drag me through court for years just to punish me. Marcus let out a short, dry laugh. He already signed them. Every single page. I looked up stunned. How? How did you get him to agree to this? Marcus leaned back in his chair, a look of cold, calculated satisfaction on his face. Julian forgot exactly where his power comes from. First, I went to my wealth management team. I froze his access to the family trust fund. He cannot touch a single dime of the old money. Then, I made a phone call to the CEO of his investment bank. I happened to control 3 of their largest corporate accounts. I informed the board that my son was engaging in unethical personal behavior that reflected poorly on their brand, and that if he remained in a client-facing leadership role, I would pull my investments. Beatrice walked into the room, handing me a cup of tea. She smiled grimly. They stripped him of his title the next morning. Marcus nodded. He was demoted to a junior administrative role in the back office. No bonuses. No expense accounts. A 70% pay cut. When his corporate credit cards were shut off and his trust was frozen, his little girlfriend, Sienna, figured out very quickly that he was no longer a golden goose. She packed her bags and blocked his number before he even got home from the office on Monday. I sat there, trying to process the magnitude of what they had done. They had systematically dismantled his entire life. They executed a flawless financial guillotine, severing him from the elite status he valued more than his own family. He could not afford the luxury hotel he was staying at, Marcus continued. So, he had to sign a lease on a basement apartment out by the airport, right next to the bus terminal. When I presented him with these divorce papers, I gave him a choice. Sign them, or I completely destroy his career in finance permanently. He signed. He is broken, Clara. He will never have the power to hurt you again. I picked up the pen. My hand was not shaking anymore. I signed my name on the dotted lines, legally severing myself from the malware that had infected my life. Before Marcus and Beatrice left that afternoon, Beatrice reached into her handbag and pulled out a crisp white envelope. She placed it gently in my hands. "This is not a settlement, Clara," she said softly. "This is a gift from Marcus and me. It is enough to pay off the remaining mortgage on this house and set up a college fund for Hazel. We want you to be completely free. We want you to raise our granddaughter in peace, without ever having to worry about money or look over your shoulder." I opened the envelope. The cashier's check inside was for a staggering amount. More money than I had ever seen in my life. I tried to refuse it, tears welling in my eyes, but Marcus put a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder. "You earned it, kid. You survived him. Now, go live your life." It has been a year since that day. I sold that massive, sterile house in the suburbs. It held too many memories of isolation and gaslighting. I used the money to buy a beautiful, sunlit 2-bedroom apartment near a massive park in the city. The walls are painted in bright, warm colors. Hazel's room is filled with soft rugs, oversized stuffed animals, and endless stacks of picture books. I went back to work part-time as a UX designer, negotiating a fully remote contract. My days are no longer dictated by the impossible standards of an elite sociopath. My days belong to me, and they belong to my daughter. People ask me sometimes if I miss being married. The truth is, I do not. I miss the illusion of the man I thought I married, but that man never existed. He was a flawless interface hiding a corrupted system. I do not miss apologizing for being exhausted. I do not miss the smell of gin and manipulation. I do not miss shrinking myself down to fit into his glass cage. Julian's life remained a ruin. He works his miserable administrative job, takes the bus back to his basement apartment, and pays his massive child support on the first of every month because he is terrified of his father. He requested to see Hazel once, about 6 months ago. I agreed to meet him at a public park, with my dad standing 10 feet away. Julian looked 10 years older. The arrogant fire in his eyes was completely extinguished. He held Hazel for 5 minutes, handed her back, and walked away with his shoulders slumped. I felt nothing for him. Not anger, not pity. Just absolute indifference. The silence in my new apartment is different from the silence in that old house. It is not heavy or isolating. It is peaceful. It is the sound of a system running perfectly smoothly, free of bugs, free of errors, and completely under my control. So, looking back at everything, the elite expectations, the manipulation, and watching his own parents strip away his wealth and pride, am I wrong for feeling absolutely zero guilt about his downfall? Should I have given him a second chance just because he's Hazel's father, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story. If you enjoyed this and haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new drama. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.